I score a goal, my family gives me the big hug every time. Oops, I'll get it. I'm the winner. I am the winner. My team is a team of legends. Well, my mum says just have fun, but I like to win. If I won the Olympics, I'd freak out and tell my friends and tell my mum.
When you slam dunk, it's like...
It feels like I'm flying. It's about the magic.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the inaugural Parent Engagement Conference Australia. My name is Dr. Charlene Smith, and I'm the General Manager of Projects and Collaboration at the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth, ARACY. I'm an Australian woman of mixed European descent. I was born on Bundjalung country, and I live and work on Ngunnawal land. I am honoured and grateful to acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and ask Wurundjeri Elder Uncle Ron Jones to the stage to welcome us to his country.
Womanjeka, everybody. Could I get everyone to say Womanjeka? Come on, that's not very good. We did better than that. Womanjeka. That's a bit better. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to, on behalf of the Wurundjeri Elders and that, give the Parent Engagement Conference a great opportunity for giving me a chance to come and do a welcome to country on my ancestors' country. My name is Ron Jones. I'm an elder of the Wurundjeri Council. The Wurundjeri people are traditional custodians of a very large area. Remember, custodians, not owners. We don't own the country owns us. And our boundaries run from the mouth of the Werribee River, then we go right up into the Great Divide, then from the Great Divide we go right into the Yarra Ranges, then from the Yarra Ranges we go right into Mount Borbor. And from Mount Borbor, we come back around to the Mordiella Creek, and then from the Mordiella Creek, we come back around to the mouth of the Werribee River. Now, my ancestors looked after this country for over 40,000 years, and we within the Wurundjeri, we are very passionate about our country, and you know, we really think of our country, and especially our children and our elders, our senior elders and that. And when I think of Parent Engagement Conference, you know, and we've been doing it for over 30,000 years, looking after our children and teaching them different things and things like that. And look, I'd like to acknowledge all past and present elders and Aboriginal elders and Torres Strait Islander elders and all elders that are here, because we're all elders of our own community. So I pay my respects to you and just pass it on from our elders and that. And on the way through here, when I was thinking I was coming here, you know, what am I going to say today? Because I always like doing it from my heart and talk about different things. And when I think of sports and like our children, you know, for 30, 40,000 years, we've been teaching our children how to look after themselves, how to look after country, how to care for country, and our animal life and that. And we love teaching our kids about our different lives and animal lives and things like that. But sadly, not. Australia has one of the highest histories of losing our wildlife and our endangered species, and we'd like to get children and teach them how to look after our waterways and everything, because our waterways are so precious to us. It's like the blood that runs through your body. And I had a couple of photos here, and I don't know if we could get them put up. So this photo here of when my mother got married in 1936, and I'm very proud of that. This wedding, because when Mum got married, her wedding went right around the whole of Australia, because my father at the time was a white man, and not very white men married Aboriginal women back in them days. And so we know what discrimination is, and we know what that type of stuff is, because when Dad married my mother, he lost his family. Of course, it was taboo for a lot of white men back in them days, 1936, to marry Aboriginal women. So we know what it feels like, and you know, when I think of my mother and everything, and she was named Princess Bullum, and she was the first grandniece to William Barrick. And a lot of people here probably wouldn't know of William Barrick, and a lot would now. William Barrick, we have another one of William Barrick. I don't know if they can put that up yet, but William Barrick was such a fantastic man that fought for his people. But this image here actually is my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother, the little baby there, and my grandfather on the other side there. And when my grandfather, he was non-European, he was non-Aboriginal, and he was European. And when he married my grandmother, he got charged, because that was against the law back in the late 1800s to marry Aboriginal women. So my grandfather, Pop Nevin, yeah, he was charged with marrying my grandmother there. And then my great-grandmother, actually, of course, my mother was born so fair, she reckons that the spirit brought shame, so that's why my mother was very fair. And she wanted to disown her from the tribe. But my grandmother's, great-grandmother's second husband, Tom Donnelly, he stood up for my grandmother and said, no, you can't do that, you know, probably it could be the spirit wanted my mother to be born so fair, you know, but it just shows a lot of people how fair she was back in them days. And, you know, so what happens, I do a lot of site work out on Aboriginal sites, and I do a lot of cultural inductions and all that type of thing on different Aboriginal sites and that. And just on 3 years ago, I was doing working on a pipeline down in out in the Maribyrnong Valley there, out in the Maribyrnong River, and we have one of our oldest burials there. And it's been carbon dated at 26,000 year old, and I was working near that site, and one of Brimbank Council engineers was driving down the track, and as he come down, he pulled up near me and he said to me, this chap hops out the ute and he takes his sunglasses off, and he said to me, what are you doing here? I said, I'm the Aboriginal Monta, and he took a step back, and I thought, what's this fella looking at? And the way everyone's looking at me now, you know, I thought, must be something wrong with me. So he turned around and he said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm the Aboriginal Monta. And he said, Aboriginal Monta? He said, but you don't look Aboriginal. I said, I don't, do I? And he said, no. I said, you know the reason why? He said, why? I said, because I was born in the daytime and all my cousins were born in the night time, you know. So then the other day I showed the photo of my mother, you know, and people said, oh, she's so blonde. I said, you know why? And they said, why? Because she's born in the morning. So, you know, a lot of people assume if you don't look Aboriginal, you're not Aboriginal, you know, and they don't assume. And here in Victoria, we don't have any full-bloods left. Our last full-blood Aboriginal was a lady called Auntie Angelina McRae that was born on Corrandirk. And then when Corrandirk was shut up, she was sent down to Lake Tyers. So what they did, like my mother and her brothers and sisters and a lot of her cousins were sent to Cumragunja because they're half-caste Aboriginal, so they split the family group. So the full-bloods were sent down there. And Angelina McRae, she died in 1986, and that was the last full-blood Aboriginal person that we have. But, you know, I just think of the wonderful stories, and especially of my mother and William Barrick. He fought against that half-caste act. And William Barrick was so renowned for what he did for his people. And I think it was the best, you could say the best Aboriginal politician we ever had in days gone by, because he was a fantastic man, and I'm very proud to come from his bloodline, because we come from his sister Annie Borat, and that's where the half-caste started within our family, because William Barrick's son David, when he passed away in the late 1800s, he's buried in the Victoria Market here, and that's where his remains are still today, and that was the last full blood of our people. So we're very passionate about William Barrick, because the fight that he fought for, because that photo is there is taken up, or the photo that was there before was taken up of Corrandirk Aboriginal Mission Station, and the things that my mum used to tell me, oh, it's such a beautiful place, but when I think of it now, it's like them refugee camps, you know, like Manus Island and that, where refugees are poured onto them places, and that's how our people were poured on. They were rounded up around Melbourne here and all over the state and then put onto the mission stations, you know. Look, I could keep talking all day, but I just love talking about my history and our family history. So, Woonona Bik again, thank you for having me here to do a Welcome to Country. Thank you very much, Tup.
Thank you so much, Ron, for that Welcome to Country. And now I would like to welcome you, now that Ron has done so, ARACY, along with our partners, the Smith family, and our major supporter, the Australian Government Department of Education and Training, are delighted to be hosting you for the next 2.5 days. I hope you're all ready to hear some fresh ideas, to share your insights, and of course to tweet. Our hashtag is PEConf 17. So please get your Twitters out and we'll all retweet each other and get parent engagement trending in Australia, hey? I think the parent engagement conversation is something that's really ready to happen. So let's keep building that momentum and let's make sure that parents, educators, community groups, governments, researchers, policymakers all over the country start maximising the learning potential of Australia's young people together. Now, I hope you've all had a chance to download the conference app and that you've built your schedule to make the most out of your time here at the conference. All of the speaker bios and abstracts are in the app, and you can even find each other on there and message directly. So please download that from the App Store. I hope you all really enjoyed the video that played at the beginning of the session. It's one of 3 that we'll be seeing over the next few days from our conference gold sponsor, the Australian Sports Commission. And it comes from their initiative called Play Sport Australia, which is a national participation initiative aiming to have more Australians, particularly young Australians, play sport more often. So as part of this initiative to drive awareness around the importance and value of sport, the ASC have developed a variety of videos that target specific messages for Aussies encouraging sport participation, one of which we've seen already. So these videos have already received over 4 million views on Facebook, 22,000 on YouTube, with over 55,000 reactions, comments and shares. And the video we just played is from the Kids Talk Sport campaign, which captures the self-belief and values that kids can realise from participating in sport and encourages all of us to find our self-belief. I'm feeling like I need to go and play a sport now after watching it, after watching those fabulous kids. So if you want to hear more about the work of the ASC, visit their website at www.aussport.gov.au and join us tomorrow morning as we'll be hearing from Australian sporting legend and ASC board member Stephen Moneghetti AM. So thank you so much to the ASC for their generous sponsorship of this conference. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first speaker this evening, who is the CEO of ARACY, Mr Stephen Bartos. Stephen's been heading us up for almost a year now and brings to our organisation a wealth of experience and knowledge in social and economic policy. He's committed to seeing Australia take a common sense, evidence-based approach to investment in our young people. And this afternoon he's going to share some insights into the importance of parent engagement for improving outcomes for all young Australians. Please welcome Stephen Bartos.
Thank you very much for that, Charlene. And can I say from the heart, thanks, Ron, for that welcome to country. Look, we have the hugest respect for the continuing work of the Wurundjeri people in care for this beautiful country that we're on, and it's always wonderful to have a generous welcome to country. So thank you very much for that. And I'm going to speak just briefly today about how we got to where we are now and why parent engagement matters, and then turn over to the remaining speakers for the rest of the afternoon. And as Charlie mentioned, we in the Smith family are pleased to be jointly hosting this conference, so we're kind of bookends. I'm talking at the beginning, and Lisa O'Brien, the CEO of the Smith family, will be talking at the end. So this is a cunning strategy to make sure you stay around for the whole conference. We're keeping a lot of the good stuff right to the last session. So please stay with us for the time. But let's talk about how we got to where we are now. We did some early work for the Family, School and Community Partnerships Bureau in 2012, a review of global literature around parent engagement that found a very clear link between parental engagement and better outcomes for children's learning and well-being. Key findings about how effectively we can intervene to link up families, teachers and students to improve outcomes. That was a bit of work that was done for the Family, School and Community Partnerships Bureau, which was an initiative of the Australian Parents Council and the Australian Council of State School Organisations. Two organisations that were already on the parent engagement journey and are still on the parent engagement journey and are both well represented here at this conference today. But it is interesting that parent engagement wasn't high profile in Australia at the time that was done. I think it would have been inconceivable that we would have got 600 of you wonderful people into a room back in 2012. We've come a long way since. We've done some work with the ACT government, which is very practically oriented. It's about provision of postcards, fact sheets, and a survey that schools can use to measure the extent of parent engagement. It's a project called Progressing Parental Engagement in the ACT, which is about partnerships between families and schools to improve outcomes for kids. And I also know that there's some wonderful people from the ACT who've been involved with that work. Put up your hand, ACT people, take pride in your work. Wendy Cave, who's the coordinator for ARACY, the Research Alliance for Children and Youth in the ACT, is also a school principal. So it's an indication of some of the kind of work that we as an organisation do. And we've been engaged more recently on a job of work for the Australian government, funded by the Commonwealth Department of Education and Training, that's doing a very in-depth study of parent engagement, what it means, and in particular how to do it better. So it's about building shared understanding, a deal of research work that we've commissioned on that, including some excellent work that's been done by Western Sydney University on how parent engagement can work in low socioeconomic status schools with Aboriginal parents, how parent engagement can work with families from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and for parents with special needs. And there's fact sheets on all of that that you can find on our website. It's about building the profile of parent engagement, and there's a parent engagement network that I know large numbers of you are members of. That's a big part of building the profile, as is this conference, of course. It's about measurement and evaluation, where we're trying to come up with shared definitions and then measure progress against them across the country. In particular, it's about identifying what works. So I think if we're looking at, from our perspective as an organisation concerned with evidence and with applying evidence to practice, which is what the Australian Research Alliance for Children and Youth was set up to do, the biggest gap that we see isn't identifying that parent engagement is important. I think that's pretty well established. How to do it well, how to reduce the threat level felt on the one hand by parents, on the other hand by teachers. Actually, I need to have a third hand here because it's also school administrators feel a threat level. It's too tricky, too difficult. How are we going to do it? Breaking down some of that is a big part of what this conference is about. And throughout all of this work, there's a particular focus funded by the Commonwealth on how to improve outcomes for Indigenous families, Aboriginal and Islander families and communities on parent engagement. And it's all led up to this conference. You people here today, and let's see a picture of yourselves at this conference. That's you. Come on. Wave at the camera, people. We're here. It's wonderful. All of that work. Oh, good. I love it. That's you. So that's our journey. Let's talk just briefly about what is parent engagement. Parent engagement really is more than what you might call parent involvement. Now, look, volunteering at the school canteen is wonderful. Wouldn't disparage it for a second. But it's not the extent of parent engagement that really makes a difference to kids in terms of their learning outcomes. Representation is also important. Look, from personal experience, one of the best things I did for my kids' education was help select a school principal for their school, and we got a brilliant principal who was absolutely suited to that school, and it was wonderful that they got a parent. I was chair of the school board at the time involved, In fact, it's probably exceptional in the sense that I was a bit pushy and insisted that I should be involved because we wanted a principal who would be suited to that school, and we got one, and it's made a big difference to kids' outcomes. But representation, being on boards, that sort of stuff is important, but it's not parent engagement. Parent engagement is about the creation of a complementarity between what happens at home and what happens at school. And by parents, we are talking about the adults who are looking after those children. Not necessarily birth parents, can be foster parents, can be community. In a lot of Aboriginal communities, it can be the elders rather than necessarily the birth parents who are doing the role of creating an environment that encourages and enhances the learning and the well-being of those children. So a lot of what parent engagement is about is creating a team between the educators and the parents broadly defined. Now look, you'll hear a lot of definitions in this conference about parent engagement, and definitions matter. It's important to understand what we're talking about, but much more important, and this is the focus of this conference, is the practices. So don't get hung up on definitions, learn the practices, what works for parent engagement. And from ARACY's perspective, we think about this as part of a whole system. So parent engagement in learning is what we're trying to achieve, what we'll see, but it's supported by a number of underlying things, the underlying beliefs and values held both by educators and parents, what resources and knowledge they have, what their power relationships are, and norms. Now look, this is stuff that can either support or prevent parent engagement. So in some senses, creating a supportive set of norms, a supportive culture, makes parent engagement work, but if you have a culture that's resistant to that, it can make parent engagement fail. So look at the bottom half of this iceberg, and that's stuff that can either help or hinder parent engagement. And the challenge is to take that and make it stuff that helps parent engagement. ARACY puts this in a broader context. So if you haven't come across ARACY, we have a wellbeing framework for kids that covers 6 dimensions, all interrelated. That kids are loved and safe, they have their material basics like food and clothing, they're healthy, they're learning, they're participating, and they have a positive sense of culture and identity. And obviously learning is something where parent engagement obviously matters, but it's important in other domains as well. So for Aboriginal kids especially, and this is certainly confirmed by the Western Sydney University research, parents are key to a child's sense of culture and identity, but that applies to other kids from all sorts of other backgrounds as well. Parent engagement is important to allow kids a voice in the decisions that affect them. It's crucially important for physical and mental health. And so parent engagement is for all parents, no matter what situation, regardless of how much money the parent has, regardless of the cultural background or the linguistic background of the parents. It's important for all parents. And it's important for all situations, all different types of schools. We've got little tasters here of some of the videos you'll be seeing during the conference. First from Brighton Grammar.
When I'm getting ready for school, my brother and my mum helped me. So my brother does, he holds my bag to get it still, and then I put my lunch box in, and then my mum puts my morning tea in.
And also from Doveton College, serving a very different area.
Reading at home is like I sit down in the lounge room with a blanket and my mum sits next to me and I read to her, but sometimes it's my dad.
See, it's not just mums, dads help with parent engagement too. It's really important. And both of those are much longer videos. Those were just little teasers for you. We'll be showing the full videos at this conference. And for both of those, we're really grateful that the principals of both of those schools have provided some extremely thoughtful comments about how they've done parent engagement really well. And of course, you've already seen a bit of a video from the Sports Commission. We've got more of them as well.
If they've got to yell out, they could say like something encouraging.
Things like, good job,
Or good pass.
you're good, just keep trying and you'll get there. "Oh, that was a great job. You're doing great."
Try as hard as you can.
You see, parent engagement isn't necessarily incredibly complicated and difficult stuff. Just words of encouragement, the evidence suggests, and the parents' expectations for their kids make an enormous difference. And it does improve learning outcomes, confirmed by all sorts of studies, the OECD PISA studies, if you go to various education departments around the country, if you look at ARACY's own evidence. The evidence just for involvement is a bit weaker, but the evidence around parent engagement, more broadly defined, is extremely strong. John Hattie here in Melbourne suggests it can be equivalent to around 2 to 3 extra years of schooling for a kid if we do parent engagement well. That's a big gain. And gosh, does Australia need it? If you look at trends in the international comparative study PISA or the trends in international maths and sciences study, we continue to fall behind. We desperately need something that will improve results, and there's all sorts of things that'll do it. We don't want to overclaim what parent engagement alone can do. There's multiple other factors involved. Excellent report from the Grattan Institute, again here in Melbourne, on turnaround schools, identified 5 different factors: leadership, teachers, the school culture. Parent engagement was one of them. There's lots of different things that go towards improving outcomes. But certainly, the evidence suggests, and ARACY would make this claim without any contradiction, being able to be mounted except if you're prejudiced against parent engagement, and that is that if you do parent engagement well, other things being equal, you will improve kids' education outcomes. And that's something we're going to be measuring. So we've engaged ASA, Australian Council for Education Research. Dr. Sam Rothman's doing a measurement tool for all of this for us. So that's going to be an important part of this journey that's still in preparation. And Sam, I haven't seen today yet, but I know he is coming to this conference. So buttonhole him and ask him about that work. And it's growing support. ARACY, Smith family, education and training, Beyond Blue, everybody, if you can't see your logo there, it's only because somebody else's logo has covered it up. We're so grateful to all of the people who've now joined us on this vitally important journey, vitally important, not for ARACY, not for the Smith family, vitally important for Australian kids. So, out of all of this, it's over to you to take the next steps. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much, Stephen. It's now my pleasure to welcome Gill Callister, the Secretary of the Victorian Department of Education and Training, to the stage. Gill has a long-held commitment to the importance of the early years and has been in public service here in Victoria for a long time, supporting kids, previously in the Department of Human Services in the Child Protection area, and just for the last couple of years with the Department of Education and Training. And now she's going to share with us some of the policy reforms that her department are implementing here in Victoria to improve outcomes for kids. Please join me in welcoming Gill.
Thank you, Charlene, for your introduction. I also would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present and to any other Aboriginal people who are with us. Thank you, Ron, for your very generous and personal welcome to country. I always certainly feel very welcome when you do that. I also want to acknowledge ARACY and the Smith family for hosting this conference, and more broadly for their commitment to supporting the learning and the development of all children through evidence-based work. You've done some really groundbreaking research and work, and you continue to. And to all of you, representatives from a whole range of different organisations and services that are providing learning and development opportunities for families and children, I hope that this is a really rewarding couple of days for you. So it's great to be able to be here and to contribute to what I think is a very important discussion about the role that parent engagement plays in maximising children's potential. There are so many different people here, and we'll all be looking for different outcomes, being interested in different aspects of this conference. But while we're a diverse room, we are here united by a common purpose, and that's about improving outcomes for children and young people and how we work with their families to do that. And if we really do want to see a system lift, and Stephen showed some of the current data that is quite controversial, if we want to see that system lift, and if we want parents and carers to be more engaged with their children, it's going to take collaboration. It isn't just about service excellence, it is about collaboration. We know the importance of a good education on a child's life, but as Stephen just so beautifully highlighted, the evidence on parent-carer engagement is absolutely overwhelming. And we can't just take children out of their families and into institutional settings and educate them. The research is absolutely clear that the biggest impact on the outcomes of children and young people is the home environment. And parents are children's first educators. And those children whose parents actively engage in their learning from birth and continue to engage throughout their children's educational journey generally do better in school. And we know now, more than ever, that the early years are when children build the emotional, the social and the problem-solving skills that will shape their lifelong well-being and success. That brains are developing at a rapid rate in the early years. The University of Melbourne's Effective Early Education Experiences for Kids, or the E4Kids study, is Australia's largest research project into early childhood education and care, and I would encourage you to have a look at the recently released information. The E4Kids study provides strong evidence that the quality of educator-child interactions makes a real difference to child outcomes. E4Kids researchers used the classroom assessment scoring system to rate early childhood education and care services against 3 quality domains: emotional support, room organisation that facilitates learning and participation in a large range of stimulating activities, and instructional support, also referred to as intentional teaching. E4Kids found that early childhood services are generally strong at providing emotional support to children, and they're good at organising the learning space in a way that facilitates stimulating activities. But they are less strong on intentional teaching. We care for our children deeply, but what we need to do is help support and strengthen intentional teaching practices with an explicit focus on children's language development and cognition. A number of E4Kids related studies looked at the home learning environment, and the results clearly show that children who experience a higher quality home learning environment with more frequent child-to-parent positive interactions outperform their peers on a range of literacy and numeracy testing, demonstrate behavioural competencies, and show greater gains in these skills over time. Shared book reading, warm and gentle interactions with children, these are critical elements of the home learning environment, and we saw some of that from the children on the video. We also know that children living in the most socioeconomically disadvantaged areas are more than twice as likely to be developmentally vulnerable than those from the most advantaged areas, and this gap is widening over time. And once that gap opens, it's difficult to close. It is less difficult to close in the early years. Children with speech and language problems are more likely to have significant clinical problems related to emotional wellbeing and behaviour, and children with these challenges are more likely to be in the lower bands of NAPLAN in Year 3. Now, NAPLAN is not the be-all and end-all of measurement, but it is a useful proxy as a measure of literacy and numeracy about how well children are learning. Analysis of Victorian data from the Australian Early Development Census, or the AEDC, between the period 2012 and 2015 found an increase in 5-year-old children's vulnerability in the language and cognitive skills domain. And these are skills that are critical for academic achievement. Analysis of the impact of vulnerability at school entry on NAPLAN scores at grade 3 shows that only 22% of the children who are vulnerable on the domain of language and cognition at school entry are achieving in the top 2 bands of NAPLAN by Year 3. Children vulnerable on even one AEDC domain are half as likely to achieve in the top 2 NAPLAN reading bands in Year 3 and even less in Year 5. Research conducted by the department in partnership with the Melbourne Institute of Applied Economic and Social Research found that the frequency of reading to children at a young age has a direct effect on their schooling outcomes, regardless of their family background and home environment. For example, reading to children 3 to 5 days per week, compared to 2 or less, has the same effect on the child's reading skills at aged 4 to 5 as being 6 months older. Reading to them 6 to 7 days per week has the same effect as being almost 12 months older. This research also found that children read to more frequently at the ages 4 to 5 achieve higher scores on NAPLAN tests for both reading and numeracy in Year 3. All of this, of course, depends on having a home learning environment where reading is possible and encouraged. All of this research shows just how critical it is that the early years are for successful learning, that we intervene earlier, prior to children commencing formal schooling, to provide the supports to families and in the early years services that combined improve children's wellbeing and enhance their developmental trajectories. And while I think that we're making great strides in the early childhood space, and that is thanks greatly to organisations like ARACY and the Smith family, there is somewhat of a disconnect in some of how across our federal and state governments we think about service provision, in particular this notion of childcare and kindergarten. Caring and learning have for too long been treated as 2 different things, as if a child is learning at kinder, but the perception being that a child is just being looked after at a childcare or early childhood centre. We're missing an opportunity if we don't see that children are learning, or could be learning, in every setting. Children, of course, don't distinguish. Every setting is a learning one in which a child can learn and develop, and we have to maximise those opportunities. It's the combination of a high-quality service system supporting high-quality parenting that is critical to making a difference. So if we all know that parents are children's first educators and parenting is critical to how well children do throughout life, then the question becomes, what does effective parenting look like? And more importantly, for policymakers, where do parents get their advice and their support from? According to research undertaken by Frameworks Institute in partnership with the Parenting Research Centre, there are significant gaps between the expert and public understandings of effective parenting in Australia. The public generally believe that parenting is innate, a set of skills that people are born with, and if you're a good person, you'll probably be a good parent. But we do also know that effective parenting is a combination of learned skills and favourable circumstances, including good social support and access to resources and advice. A separate study by the Parenting Research Centre last year also found that many parents from friends and family and sometimes get advice from friends and family and sometimes their GP or other health professionals. And together, this research shows that while parents might want and need advice and support, they either don't always know how or where to get it, or they're too afraid sometimes of the stigma associated with seeking help. And it's evidence like this that is informing and underpinning our work in the Department of Education and Training, along with our partners here in Victoria in the early years. We do recognise that we've moved well beyond prescriptive doctrines that children should be seen and not heard, and when to feed and pick up babies. And history is littered with parenting advice, whether it's the regimented advice of Truby King or the previously ubiquitous approach of Dr. Spock. In the case of Truby King, he controversially, although not necessarily at the time, emphasised a strict routine of feeding, sleeping and bowel movements, and advocated parents avoid cuddling and provide attention and avoid providing attention to their babies to build character. There are parenting approaches, even if not quite so extreme as Truby King's, that become fashionable from time to time, that go in and out of vogue, and we should approach these with caution. It's the brave person that starts a conversation about smacking, co-sleeping, feeding solids at a particular age, etc. You know it all. I think we need to be not focusing on how to raise children, but more how to support parents nurturing the core developmental skills and milestones in their children. And particularly, we need to move from the focus on early health and development to a focus on learning. It's with this deep understanding of child development and appreciation of the evidence that shapes our work, while also acknowledging that parenting is informed by what works for individual families, their contexts, their values and their traditions. And this year, the Victorian Government has made significant budget investments in early childhood. Of particular note is $202.1 million for an early childhood reform plan announced in the recent Victorian budget. And I think this plan is a game changer. This plan makes significant investments in early childhood in both kindergartens and in services that support families in their crucial role in promoting their child's wellbeing and development. It includes $108 million in a package of kindergarten reforms to really build higher quality and more inclusive services that focus on the quality of teaching and learning. And more support for parenting is a key direction in the plan, and why the government has invested in strengthening the maternal and child health service, building parenting skills, confidence and stronger connections with community. The $81.1 million in funding for maternal and child health and parenting support reforms includes expanded maternal and child health services for families who need additional support and may be at risk of poor outcomes due to factors like parent-infant attachment concerns, premature or low birth weight babies, children with a disability, parental mental health concerns or family violence. We know that pregnancy and the postnatal period is a time of heightened family violence risk, and this plan provides $11 million in funding for additional outreach visits from a maternal and child health nurse where there is a concern about family violence. And there's a strong focus in Victoria at the moment on family violence following the historic Royal Commission that handed down its findings just about a year ago. So this sort of support is extremely important, with a dedicated focus not just on women but on the children who experience violence at home. Analysis of the school entry health questionnaire and NAPLAN results showed that alcohol and drug-related problems in the family had an impact on learning and NAPLAN performance, but not so much as the impact on children who've witnessed violence. The effect on learning for children who have witnessed violence was greater. The analysis found that 36% of children who witnessed violence, as reported by their parents in prep, achieved in the top 2 bands of NAPLAN reading in Year 3, and that compares to 52% of children who had not witnessed violence, and demonstrates again how important early intervention and prevention is. The social, the emotional and the neurological effects of witnessing violence at a young age significantly impact learning. Now, for many of you that won't be a great surprise, but what may be a surprise is the significant effect that it continues to have. And what we know about those children is they are often identified not as children who've suffered a terrible experience or an injury, but often it's unknown to educators and service providers, and it may present as behaviour problems, which are often then dealt with differently. Reaching out and providing support early to those who need it most can prevent those vulnerable children from missing out on educational attainment that other children are able to manage. So we are also working in close partnership with the Aboriginal community to lift outcomes for our Koori children through our Aboriginal Education Plan, Marung. And complementing all of this is the Roadmap for Reform, Strong Families and Safe Children. And that is helping to create universal and targeted services that are coordinated and working together to support vulnerable families and children. And we're trying to do this work in partnership with parents and carers, communities, community service organisations, universal services and local government. And it is all underpinned by collaboration. We cannot do this if we have a siloed programmatic approach. So for this reason, we've established a new early years compact between the Department of Education and Training, the Department of Health and Human Services and local government. This compact will help us deliver stronger place-based planning and problem solving and help us build new ways of working to build community understanding of the importance of the early years and how families can support their children's health and learning and development. I'm confident in Victoria that we've got the tools in place to promote and support parent engagement, but I think we've still got a way to go. Our early years services are all underpinned by the Victorian Early Years Learning and Development Framework, the VELDF, which encourages professionals to work as equal partners with families to support the development and learning of their children. By demonstrating respect and through genuine efforts to engage families, early years settings are well placed to prime parents for lifelong engagement in their children's learning. The framework also emphasises the importance of supporting children's and families' transitions as they move within and across services throughout the early childhood period. Within government schools, the Framework for Improving Student Outcomes, or now known as the FISO, is also focusing on maintaining parental engagement beyond the early years and into primary and secondary schooling by strengthening our emphasis on parents as partners. The FISO supports schools to build better relationships with parents, to improve their educational expectations and support student achievement. And schools are being encouraged to think creatively about how they can better achieve parental engagement and what strategies they can use in their local community to promote that. And that in turn fosters a connectedness to school, a connectedness to learning that can help prevent disengagement or non-completion. So as I said, I think that we are well placed. We have a full range of evidence that tells us what we need to do, that tells us the importance of the early years. And we've had this evidence for a fair while now. We know we need to engage early, and we know that environment significantly impacts brain development and learning. But collectively, we have to find a way to build a stronger sense of urgency around this work. We can't keep referring to the evidence without building key reform opportunities in our practice, in our connections, in our services, and on the part of government in our policies and our investment. Across service sectors and with families, early childhood needs to emerge as the preeminent opportunity for better long-term lifetime achievement. We owe that to the future generations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gill. That was fantastic and terrific to be reminded of the vital importance of the early years and the effects on children of violence when they've witnessed that before they start school, and all the things that we need to do to ensure that we prevent those things from occurring, making sure that children aren't missing out on educational opportunities through those universal and targeted interventions. It's fantastic to hear all of the reforms that are going on here in Victoria. Looking forward to hearing more. So some of us have already had the pleasure of meeting the next speaker in his workshop this afternoon, which I popped into for about 5 minutes to take a couple of pictures and do a tweet, and gosh, I wanted to stay and hear more. But I'm going to have to hit up some of the people who were in the workshop to hear more details, perhaps at the welcome reception. Professor Bill Lucas is the Director of the Centre for Real World Learning at the University of Winchester. He's internationally regarded for his expertise and research in rethinking the purposes of schooling and vocational training. Many of you would be familiar with his 2015 book, co-written with Guy Claxton, Educating Ruby, which asks challenging questions about the kinds of capabilities schools should be cultivating and suggesting new ways of working for parents and teachers. The Educating Ruby movement is a call to action for everyone who cares about education in an uncertain world, and I think everyone in this room probably fits that description. So with great thanks to the generosity of the Mitchell Institute, where Bill is currently an international advisor, I'm pleased to welcome to the stage Professor Bill Lucas to bring us into the conversation, rethinking the role of parents and families in the education of their children in a volatile, uncertain, changing world. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you very much indeed, Charlene. Thank you, Gill, very much. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you very much, Ron. It's very powerful to be connected to place in the way that you do. I've heard you on a couple of other occasions when it's been my pleasure to be in Melbourne. So I took the second part of the title off the shorter version there. I could hardly bring myself to leave it on because I left one London, and it's a very different London now. And although it seemed like the title I wanted to speak to when I wrote the proposal, I've moved on a little bit, but not that much. I've moved on in that it feels morally particularly raw at the moment, but not in the broader agenda that I want to talk about. So as Charlene said, I'm attached to the Mitchell Institute, where it's my pleasure to be an international advisor, and we're particularly interested in looking and thinking about capabilities. What is it when somebody can do something? How do they acquire the disposition to be able to do something over the kitchen table, in the classroom, in the community? How does learning get transferred from one place to another? These are not straightforward arguments and issues at all. So if my Mitchell affiliation leads me to want to talk to the topic of capabilities, my role as a dad leads me to want to be really open and honest about how tricky it is to be a parent today. May I just do a straw poll and invite you to put a hand up if you are one, or carer. So congratulations, or indeed commiserations, depending on how life looks and feels today. I have 3 kids. The youngest is 13, and the eldest, Tom, is 26. He's in London, which I guess is also why it's slightly poignant. And I was about to be able to say to myself and to my dear wife that he was moving off the bank of dad, but it turns out he's not quite yet. Because you may have noticed that houses are very expensive in Melbourne and London, and he's gradually moving from renting a 5-share to a 4-share to a 3-share, and he's just moved in to a rented 2-share. And guess what? Dad, I don't suppose you could help me out with a deposit, could you? Recognise any of that if you've got older kids? So I want to make an argument to you today. And the argument is essentially that, as Stephen and Gill have said very elegantly, we know a lot about the impact of parental engagement when it is done well. We know a lot about the processes. We know where some of the processes are particularly difficult and particularly impactful, as in, you might say low SES, I might say young men and women in considerable poverty in different parts of the world. And the argument goes like this, that as the world has moved on, our thinking about schools hasn't moved on enough. This is important because as parents, we have to live between the world of school and the world of home and community. The second part of the argument is that the world is most definitely changing. Now, that doesn't mean we need to throw out babies with bathwater, and I think sometimes we can overclaim, but it does seem to suggest, and I'm going to offer you some evidence, that there are certain capabilities that will stand us in good stead wherever we are in the world. Not just in the early years, you're absolutely right to focus on that, but actually as teenagers and in one's 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and in the fourth age, if we make it there. The argument moves on from that to suggest that as there is such a consensus about what these are, maybe the focus needs to be on how we cultivate them. What's the respective role of home and school and family? And I don't think we do have the answers there. I think there's some really emerging and promising practices, but I think we might, so I'm going to probably be asking more questions and I'm offering answers in my presentation. And all the time, how might parents' role change, but also how might schools' role change? And because schools and parents don't exist in a vacuum, how do states think about what they do? How do education departments, how do curriculum specifiers, how do they think about all of this? It's my very great pleasure and privilege to be working a lot with the State of Victoria's Department of Education and also with the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Authority. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. So that's where I'm going. If you wanted to sum it up, it would be, not is parent engagement a good thing, but parent engagement for what kind of world and with whom? So, let's start. Once upon a time, in Greece, it was discovered and thought that you needed to learn certain things. And once we got to the Middle Ages, certainly in Europe, we called this the Trivium. And the Trivium was taught largely in universities, but anything that happens in universities, as we know well, influences what happens in schools, was grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Recognise that? That's kind of yesterday's literacy, numeracy, and digital understanding, probably. Except they're all really to do with words and making sense of words. They're remarkably close to critical thinking, actually. And as well as the Trivium, which was the starting out, if you like, the primary end of this, there was the Quadrivium, the four-meeting of ways. And in the four-meeting of ways, we learnt other subjects like arithmetic, like geometry, like music, and astronomy. There's not much call for astronomy or even astrology, except for horoscopes these days. But otherwise, that was the essential curriculum. Fast forward to North America in general, and Toronto in particular, to the dawning of the 20th century. And a man called William Briggs is thinking about, in fact, I imagine him going down to his local paper, because of course social media wasn't around in that day, saying, I've just had this great idea. It's called 20th Century Skills. He's writing in 1899, and just have a look at what he's suggesting we need all citizens to have. It's a very, very, very modern agenda. There is the word of the OECD, adaptability, stage, centre, character and character power. My colleague Guy Claxton writes books called Building Learning Power. There is, I'm a great admirer of several American educators, but Angela Duckworth in particular, and her coinage or her use of the word grit. I've thought for a while that maybe she'd made that word up, but no. Grit was North American slang 150 years ago. And just allow yourself to wander around, if you can see that okay from the back, at these other words. There are words that bespeak of moral character, of courage. Words that speak of what I might call epistemic or performance character, like perseverance. Words that might appeal to employers in terms of just showing up, like promptness. They're all there, aren't they? There is a curio at the bottom, and if you found it, you may be quietly smiling. There's not a lot of call for princely manhood, I don't think, either in Melbourne or, for that matter, where they live some of the time in London. So why am I showing you that? Well, I'm showing you to suggest that there's nothing new here. We have known that as well as literacy and numeracy and NAPLAN and ATAR and PISA and all of those other aggregators of one kind of intelligence, there's another set of things that parents and families are concerned about, need to be concerned about, because they're who we are. It's us as rounded individuals. And for me, the debate has shifted too far. The pendulum has swung too far to that which it is actually quite easy to measure, and not far enough towards that which it is remarkably complex to measure. Cue this particular place, Melbourne, and I'll come on to that in a second. 17 years later, down in America, John Dewey was writing in his wonderful book, you may well know it, Education and Democracy. He was expressing an extraordinary niggling doubt. Only in education, he said, never in the life of a farmer, a sailor, a merchant, a physician, or a laboratory experimenter does knowledge mean primarily a store of information aloof from doing. That is happening in some places. We're building stores of information as more and more knowledge is made, and our children are often being required, certainly in my country of England, factually to recall them. I find this really quite extraordinary, but then maybe I would. In Melbourne, you take a different view. In Melbourne in 2008, educators and politicians and thoughtful researchers got together and produced a stunning document. I'm sure you all know it. But for me, it laid the path out, the route map, for a different kind of education that was as much about knowledge and skill as it was also about capability. And I like your word capability. I'm going to offer some others as we go through. I've used disposition, maybe not everybody's favourite, but I like it because if you're disposed to do something, it means you actually do it. I know a lot of people who talk about being kind, but unless you're actually disposed to being kind, it's not really a terribly useful attribute, is it? So the Melbourne Declaration has paved the way in Australia for, I think, some of the most innovative thinking about this. And the ACARA curriculum for capability is excellent. And I like the way that the state here is interpreting it, simplifying it, thinking about the evolution of these things over 2-year periods, not 1-year periods, thinking about critical and creative thinking about ethical understanding, thinking about personal and social capability, and thinking, and my goodness me, how important, thinking about intercultural understanding. I think almost everything that we do at the moment needs to be rebalanced so that some of this we see more of and some of that we see less of. This kind of thinking led my colleague Guy Claxton and myself to write a book called Educating Ruby. Have you seen the film Educating Rita? If you have, you will know that the Willie Russell play turned into a film has Rita the first in her generation to go on to university. So the kind of thing that we're looking for in terms of social mobility. And of course the university isn't quite ready to deal with Rita. And so we imagine, Guy and I, that Rita has a granddaughter and she's in your school. And we ask questions like, as well as getting fantastic maths and joyful science and creative English and extraordinary physical education and wonderful geography and every other subject that you can think of, is she at the same time cultivating capabilities? And if so, what are they? And these are our candidate 7. And forgive us, we've neatened them up to words that begin with the letter C because we're writing directly to parents. We're writing to parents who want to be able to have conversations about these kind of things. I know they do. We interviewed lots of them as we were writing the book. Guy and I are friendly with another wonderful American educator, David Perkins at Harvard, who has a delightful phrase, life-worthy education, or I should say delightful word, to describe what he calls those things likely to matter in the lives learners are likely to live. Isn't that lovely? I think that's a lovely algorithm for taking more thoughtful, making more thoughtful decisions about what counts in school. It's called Future Wise, if you want to have a read. That's my throat clearing, okay? Now I'm off with the first leg of the argument, that the world is changing and we need to change too. The world is changing, as I've suggested, in terrible ways through migration. Australia clearly has this issue. We clearly have it in Europe, and we slightly dodge it in England. But we had a lot of it. It is everywhere. It is quite frightening for many ordinary people who never thought they would be on a boat like that in the Mediterranean. This is Manchester last week. And kids going to a concert never thought that that would happen. But at the same time, in these challenging times, the outpouring of good-natured, collegial kindness has been wonderful and is surely at least as much what we're about as literacy and numeracy. I want both. This is not an either-or. This is not a binary. We focus on that at our peril. And by the way, if kids get better at these capabilities, the results go up. So it's clearly not an either-or. Look at John Hattie's work, look at Dylan Williams' work, look at Michael Fullan's work on that topic. It's pretty damn clear. We're clearly users of, and sometimes abusers of, technology, such that it's possible sometimes to creep around the Lucas family and wonder whether anybody has legs. I'll come on to the strange phenomenon of parents listening without attention, which I think relates to technology too. I'm in that camp. I'm trying not to be, but it's tricky. And our kids will be on Facebook and Instagram, and sometimes they'll be being kind, and sometimes they won't. And we need to be aware of all that. And that's tricky. It's tricky enough anyway. It's always been tricky. I'll come on to that being a parent. Education is not just life-worthy, as David Perkins suggests, but I fear it goes on for a long time. These, I imagine, are two parents. It's rather nice, actually. They could be two gay men wandering back to school, and there's something about the stoop of the shoulder, isn't there, that kind of says, school days were not my happiest, and therefore it is with no great joy I go to that quaint thing called a parent-teacher meeting. I don't know about you, but I have it in for parent-teacher meetings, having been at the wrong end of them and sitting sometimes on a small stool whilst my very good kid's primary teacher is trying to tell me interesting things that I don't want to know, because I know that. There's some other stuff I do want to know, and I don't know, and I'm a flipping educator, how to move us on to the things that I do want to talk about. Now, I reckon if you did a great big calculation of the amount of wasted time that is parent-teacher consultations that are not well run, there are some that are fantastic. Why don't we Skype? My GP allows me to Skype sometimes when I'm travelling. Does yours? It's coming. And my GP doesn't necessarily assume that everything has to happen in the same way. General practitioners are quite like general teachers, aren't they? We can learn a lot from health and from their consultations, I think. Lifelong learning is, as Jean Piaget put it memorably, the principal goal of education in schools should be creating men and women who are capable of doing new things, not simply repeating what other generations have done. Men and women who are creative, inventive, and discoverers, who can be critical and verify and not accept everything they are offered. In another moment, he defined intelligence thus: intelligence is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. That's my definition of parenting, by the way, as well. Who knows, parental engagement possibly gets called into that as well. So As I woke up this morning, I was pleased to see that the Herald Sun, a newspaper that I look at from time to time but isn't known for its coverage of education, is featuring the capability remodelling going on here. And it's interesting, its line on this, its headline was, it's page 8 if you want to see it, after some dreadful local things here, "Time to toughen up." I'd been interviewed for this, and this was not what I said at all, so beware talking to any journalist working for a paper with Sun in the name, clearly. But it is actually a very good piece indeed. And it, for me, gets closer to the parent voice, because it allows us to see the dilemma of, as biological parents or carers, wanting our kids to do the very best, and therefore we need and want all the things that we know add stress and pressure, like going to good destinations, and at the same time we want rounded, kind, good people. And it's a good piece. I commend it to you. You can find it on the web if you don't take that paper. As well as lifelong learning, we have another phenomenon in schools called lifelong testing. We in England are very good at this. I think we're probably the nation that tests its kids more often than any other. Please don't learn from us there. In many regards, you've been far smarter, I think, in the way that you're dealing with your education. And of course, it is a practical skill, learning how to take a test, isn't it? So as somebody who runs the Centre for Real World Learning, I want a bit of time spent on that. I would expect my kids' teachers to teach them some of the techniques, but not for the whole flipping year, and not learning about practicing for tests, which can happen, and which will drive you to something that isn't necessarily helpful. Now, the Southern Hemisphere is doing some really good work here. Here's a recent piece of research looking at, this is such a dreadful phrase, isn't it? Transversal competencies. What is one of those, I beg you to consider? Well, it's what you and I call a capability. It's that kind of thing that doesn't fit neatly. And it's what we're going to need more of. And when you look close up, you see the Australian curriculum. The capabilities are almost all specified in there. Indeed, Australia was a contributing partner in the research. If you were to go to America, you'd see the work where Ken Robinson has been most recently, although he's a Brit. Wonderful work and thinking on creativity. There aren't many TED Talks that get 44 million hits, and that's just the last time I did a screenshot. It's probably 47 now. So articulate persuaders of a different view of school and a different role, consequently, for parents and families. Four-dimensional education, the Partnerships for 21st Century Skills as was, now learning, much better, is doing some really wonderful research-based stuff. Everything I'm showing you here can be downloaded for free. And there's some really good stuff. And it's painting a different picture of what counts and what we need to get better at. Closer to hand, and you've now taken some of this work in your Australian Teaching and Learning Toolkit, which bases itself on the Education Endowment Foundation and Sutton Trust Alliance in the UK, is a set of agreed, I hate this phrase too, non-cognitive. Don't you hate that? Cognitive is what people call high-status subjects that they find easy and others find difficult, yeah? Non-cognitive is what employers call soft skills, which are actually really hard. You are only, as a psychologist, I promise you, you're only non-cognitive when you're dead, okay? So almost everything we do in life requires head, heart, and body, working in seamless union. And everything we do in schools, or too much we do, doesn't encourage that. But Leslie Gutman and Ingrid Shawn have shown very clearly the kind of things that are really valuable in every sense. Good for character, good for results. And that's the win, I think. That's the sweet spot we're trying to find. And I think we need to find that in parental engagement thinking too. Now, it's not just educationalists. Here's James Heckman, Nobel Economics laureate, saying exactly the same thing. Return on investment for society requires kids who have this lot. This could have been written by me or you or the Australian curriculum capabilities. And they're really good and powerful things, and we don't spend enough time thinking about how you get them. Do you get them by accident, by osmosis? Do you get them because you have fantastic parenting? Yes. Do you get them because you have fantastic teaching? Yes. Do you get them because you have fantastic community opportunities? Yes. But how do those all connect? We really need to know a lot more about that, and we reviewed that evidence recently in that book. Employers too don't just want literate, numerate, digitally competent kids. They don't just want kids who show up, who know how to talk properly and wear the right kit. Here's the Confederation for British Industry, not exactly a well-known left-wing progressive think tank, talking about what it wants from the system. And what it wants is determined, optimistic, emotionally smart kids. That's what I want as a dad, isn't it? Is that what you want as a mum or a dad or a carer or an educator or somebody working in a not-for-profit organisation? So hooray. So there is a movement out there, but sometimes I feel it's as if it hasn't kind of connected with all these other debates that are going on. Sorry if I'm sounding a bit polemic about this, but as you may tell, I care about this, and I think there are some shifts that you are making in Australia and that we can be making. The great arbiter of all things that count in education, the great god of all this is, of course, the OECD and its smart sister, PISA. All education ministers tremble in their boots or high heels at the thought of where they will sit in the PISA rankings. Even Australia quavered when it found itself not at the very top of collaborative problem solving in 2015 and promptly commissions ACER to explain why they were only wherever you were. We were not much better either. In 2018, the innovative domain that PISA will test is global competence. What an amazing idea. I just wish they'd spent a bit more time figuring out what it is. Can you think about how would you express creative curiosity in post-Trump truth USA, in Confucianist China, and in the great city of Melbourne? It would look very different, wouldn't it? So how will you possibly assess it? Well, they're now realizing that it's going to be challenging. I'm very thrilled to say that in 2021, the PISA test will be creative thinking. And I'm very proud to say it's going to be using the work that I and my colleague Guy Claxton have developed over 10 years. So we're very excited about that, and we're very excited about the kind of partnerships that with Mitchell we're establishing with different states across Australia. So this is the argument, and its conclusion is that learning needs to and is changing for most of us who bother to look. There are various trends, and where it was seen to be a school episode, it's now seen to be lifelong. Where it was seen to be, you know what, well, it's largely formal, it's largely taught, it's not. Watch any child like my son learning to surf with a library of YouTube videos and standing on his surfboard and trying to practice that in real time in our front hall. And I'm sure you can think of examples too. It's no longer obvious what has an undeniable place on the curriculum, is it? To what extent are we balancing capabilities and knowledge? And to what, whoops, that was quick, wasn't it? To what extent are we balancing certainty? We need this bit of maths. David Perkins has what he calls the quadratic equation test. Let me try it on you. How many people have used quadratic equations in the last year? Last decade? I'm looking around for some good mathematicians or ecologists use it. Last 2 decades? When you were at school? Okay. So now that's not saying that there isn't curious stuff that we might need to learn or want to learn that we'll never use, but it's just a kind of pointer to help us just think what is most important and collaborative as much as independent. So all of this washes through being a parent, doesn't it? Now it's really tricky being a parent. It's always been tricky being a parent. Here is a, oh dear, it's just going to, here is a mummy duck. Oh dear. So sad that, isn't it? If you want your own copy, you can go to Google Image. I've taken the top off and Google Image search bad parenting. I never use that word. I never use that expression. There's no notion for me in my head of bad parenting. There's just different parenting. So, but this is, I really relate to this. I'm often striding ahead and suddenly looking back and discovering that my kids, who I thought were all around me, have disappeared. Luckily, there aren't so many of those grills, and they've grown a bit fatter these days, so they wouldn't fall through if there were. But all I'm trying to say is that almost our most important thing as parental educators is empathy, isn't it? It's empathy for the human condition, that there's no rule book, no manual. This is tricky. It's always going to be difficult. We're really listening, looking, empathizing. That's so important. And that all around us, not just in our kids' storybooks, there are bear traps that we might fall into. Social media bear traps, all sorts of moral issue bear traps, all sorts of gender bear traps, and sexuality bear traps. There's so many things. It's hard. I don't know why I'm a parent. Do you know why you're a parent? It's so tricky, isn't it? And not only that, if you're in England, you vicariously experience all the flipping tests that your kids take. So When we were interviewing parents, we found that parents were at least as stressed as their kids. And the closer you get to middle classdom, the more stressed they are, because they've also got an army of other people helping their kids, and they're helping their kids, and they're really making them even more stressed about the kind of management that's going into helping their kids do whatever their kids need to do, which maybe they might be doing. And out there, of course, we've got wonderful role models all the time. I'm fixed. I'll come on to fixed mindsets in a second. We've got scholarly and thoughtful analyses of what it's like to be a child today. And we can see the trends, you know this, in terms of mental well-being, reported well-being. It's going in absolutely the wrong way, whether you're looking at the Children's Society in the UK, UNICEF across the world, or the most recent PISA study, which you didn't take part in Australia, which would have shown you some really interesting data. We did, and it hurts because, we've got a lot of learning to do there. I'm about 10 minutes away, so I will keep to time, I promise you. And if I'm rising to my theme, well, then I'm rising to my theme. Parental engagement is vital in all of this, how we do all of this and what we're learning from it. And I'm not going to go over that ground, but I just wanted to say it because it is so important. It is, for me, the glue that connects these different worlds of knowledge, skill, and capability. It is the connecting rods, I'm mixing my metaphors here, that makes all this possible. Not, this is what we do at home, and it's a kind of poor imitation of what you get in the classroom. Or this is fluffy and informal and extracurricular, and it doesn't really count as much as what you're doing that's the real work. I don't think we need to think like that. And we know a lot, and there are wonderful people in this conference. John Hattie's been mentioned, ARACY's work, the Smith family. We've got Karen Mapp in the conference, Heather Weiss. We've got Joyce Epstein, not here, but here in spirit, I'm sure. And in my country, Charles DeForge, Alma Harris, and a lot of friends, I would call them friends, who are taking different looks, thoughtful, scholarly, practice-driven, and research-informed looks at what works and why it works. Interestingly, as Gill said, it is absolutely the home. And that's, of course, absolutely the most difficult place to get to as a formal educator in many cases. And what's going on is definitely around communication. There's some really interesting studies about this. Communication showing about listening. Can you read that, okay? Yeah, and of course, the biggest illusion about communication is that it's happened at all, isn't it? This is Spot the dog, and of course, communication is two-way, not just Spot the dog's master or mistress. Listening with attention, which means, of course, note to self, turn the flipping thing off half an hour before you go home, so that you're not still in the email not completed space. And if you have to do it later at night, you have to do it. But it's a real challenge, isn't it? Because we're surrounded. It doesn't stop. And if you're in demanding jobs, and many of us are, that doesn't go away. Talk that acknowledges feelings. We know this from all the well-being studies, and we know how we can get better at that, and we know there's some really good interventions across the world. Talk that's about solving problems. Talk that is more about questions. Look at Ellen Langer's wonderful work on this. Could be worlds rather than is worlds. So we're veering away from certainty and encouraging critical thinking and questioning. Praise that is descriptive. I'm going to come on to that. It's the core message of where I'm going in a minute. Last part then. So there is a changing role for us, and by definition, there's a changing role for schools. I'm largely leaving what that is as a matter of questions. In the workshop today, we were being very specific about what it might be. But I think there are all sorts of changing roles, and I just, because I was getting a bit serious there, a change of tack here, want to try my favourite card trick on you. May I do this? Did you all sign the disclosure before you came in, by the way? Oh, okay, good. You didn't? Never mind. So I'm now going to predict, you can all read that, can't you? Choose a card. Have you all chosen one? Because you are lovely, compliant, thoughtful people. Now, I'm going to tell you something that may come as a bit of a shock, that I can predict with absolute 100% certainty that you've all chosen the same card. Is this believable? Hello? I was told also by Stephen that he'd invited the finest and most intelligent group of parental educators. And I'm just having my doubts, because there's sort of a 1 in 5 rule going on here, isn't there? You know, and probably some complex algorithm for which quadratic equations would have been helpful had I been paying attention. So, okay, let me just have the pleasure of proving you wrong. Oh, by the way, some Australians are sceptical. Have you discovered this? Some of you have already chosen another card, haven't you? On the sure and certain knowledge that we'll show him. We won't have a POM come in here and try that one on us. This came from a wonderful Scottish educator, Andy Clark, from a book, Natural Born Cyborg, about the role of technology, which is weird, really, because it's a card trick. So look away now, and I'm going to prove you wrong. Are you ready to be proved wrong? Are you looking forward to that? Okay, yes, it's gone. Oh, wow. What have I done? What have I done? Oh, ye noticers of tricks and trickers, ye noticers and spotters of snake oil, I have moved the lot of them, haven't I? Okay, honesty time. How many people just for a moment, for a nanosecond, for a little twitch of a moment thought, blimey, he's pulled it off? Wave at me. Thank you very much. How many of you thought relatively quickly, nah, he's moved the lot? How many of you never put your hands up in public? Okay. So Andy Clark's point is that we stop noticing, and we stop noticing often because of the way we use language. So I asked you to choose a card to the exclusion of the other 4, and of course your well-evolved brain says, thanks very much, I won't waste my short-term memory. In terms of neuroscience and psychology at the moment, our understanding of short-term memory is breaking news in really understanding learning, but we'll not talk about that today. That's for another topic. So can I invite you, as you go through this magnificent conference, to allow yourself to approach a problem in a different way. Just to kind of stop and let it breathe and think, oh, that's really interesting. I've not seen it like that. And I'll go and read that, or I'll go and talk to her, or go and think about that. One more, anyone who's a parent in this room will have been caught out at some stage by an enthusiastic, probably 10 or 11-year-old who bounces back home from school into the kitchen and says, look, Mum, look, Dad. And you have this kind of crisis moment, don't you? Moral crisis. I know the answer. Do I pretend I don't know the answer? Is that ethical? Or do I not? Have you been there? Okay. So what is the answer? They're both the same. Could you say that a little bit more loudly? Oh, joy, oh, joy, oh, joy. Because they're not both the same. There is nothing so fantastic for a Brit than hearing the sound of a whole auditorium of Aussies who make a mistake. I don't mean that, of course, my friends. I really don't mean that. Yes, I do. Okay. Some of my best friends were Australians. I'm nearly there. At the heart of parental engagement is a project called Parental Engagement for Capability Throughout Lifetime, focused on learning. At the heart of parental engagement is a project called How Can We Help Our Young Men and Women Become Capable, Morally Capable, and Epistemically Good at Learning Capable, and what simple interventions can we use? And there are 3 that I believe we really should be using. We're using them in schools, we're not using them. They're relatively straightforward to get your head round. We need to set goals. You know, it's obvious. We need to know if we're moving towards our goals. It's called assessment for learning in schools. It's called common sense out there in the real world. Feedback loops. And we need to practice. This is the noun practice, but we need to practice with the S. And we're learning a lot about deliberate practice. And we're learning a lot about intentional practicing. And that's something that parents and parent educators can benefit from. We've put all this together in the UK, and a number of schools in Australia are members, in a different kind of school network. A school network of teacher researchers and parent educators called the Expansive Education Network. This is a book published by ACR just down the road as a tie-up with the Open University Press in the UK. And in it we explore the conundrum of the 2 kind of tests of life, that lot and this lot. And we want both. We want kids who are going to be academically successful, if that's their bent, or vocationally successful, but also are just going to be all-round decent, thoughtful people who can think for themselves, work with strangers, and get on with people they don't necessarily particularly like. That's what we want, isn't it? And to do that with respect and dignity and honour and all of those. Somewhere in amongst this, so there are 4 bits of what it is to be an expansive educator, I think. One is the belief that I've been banging on about, that education is more than just all the things that typically appear on a school timetable. I don't think there's any disagreement about that. In fact, I think there's research and policy agreement. Secondly, it's expansive in the sense of what it is to be human. We believe that most people can get better at most things. Intelligence is in that sense expandable. Not all the time, and not genetically silly either. Not bell curve territory. I can't change the colour of my eyes biologically, size of my, all of that. Of course, there's a huge amount of inheritance. But there's a huge amount more, as we're discovering, of what we can do. The third feature is where we fit. That school needs to expand outside its walls, outside its doors, and truly work with parent, family, and community. And the fourth is an expansion of the role of teacher. Teacher not just as knower, but teacher as questioner, teacher as action researcher. We're doing some great work at Mitchell at the moment called Powerful Learning and Teaching, where school principals and their staffs are exploring what this looks like to create curious schools. A little while back I was here and did a piece for The Conversation. Do you know this website? It's really thoughtful. And I wrote this piece called How to Praise Your Child, Why Simply Saying Well Done is Not Helpful. And the press picked up on it, and it had been downloaded about 40,000 times within the week. Because it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? We're taught, we almost biologically need to think that praising our child is a good thing. It turns out from the research of John Hattie here, it can actually send you downwards. But most importantly, Carol Dweck in the States, and Angela Duckworth, and Lauren Resnick, and a number of others in this sort of space, that there are two different kinds of parent and two different kinds of children. And broadly speaking, we mix them up at our peril, and we need to understand them. It's so important, this, that actually there's the Times of London talking about how it can harm some students if we don't get the praise right. And she calls it growth mindset, she being Carol Dweck. Just wave at me if you're familiar with this. That's a fantastic, I speak quite a lot of events like this, and with teachers' hands, I would expect to see a lot of hands up. I would not expect to see, and I'm very heartened to see so many hands up in this much broader group. Now, they're not fixed like night after day, neither are they, you have to have identikit portfolios or descriptors, but there are definitely, and let's think of some of the kids and adults that you know. There's those who love to show off, to show they can know the answer to the easy question, who don't really push themselves. I'm not going to go right down that list, and they're what Carol Dweck calls fixed mindset. And there are those on the right who have another set of characteristics. Not all of them, you have to learn them sometimes. But for them, lifelong learning is a glorious adventure where they're constantly pushing themselves. They're never going to be dissing their mates on Facebook. That's not what they do. They're going to be saying, well done. Well, that's great. They have a pride and an ethic of excellence in everything they do. Ron Berger's work in the States is very good on this too. We were looking at Austin's Butterfly as a parental engagement tool earlier on. Do you know Austin's Butterfly? If you don't, Google Austin's Butterfly. It's the most remarkable piece of education that causes the most wonderful conversations between parents, families, and formal and informal educators. It's about the power of feedback. That's all it's about. It's about somebody Austin, who draws a butterfly that looks nothing like the swallowtail butterfly it's meant to look like. And by the end of a relatively short series of feedback loops, he's drawn a beautiful butterfly. Now, Carol Dweck did not divide the world just into two categories. Carol Dweck discovered that the group on the right statistically significantly outperform the group on the left on all tests that we've managed to come up with so far. This has been replicated in different countries, in English-speaking, in non-English-speaking countries. Most importantly, she found that there is a mechanism, and this is where a number of us are sitting and exploring now, for moving from being in the fixity of purpose to being in the growth mindset camp. And that is this. It was the central word in my last but two slides, feedback. It's the way we give feedback. It's the way we attribute effort. If somebody says to me, however well-meaning, well done, Bill, another A grade, or even another J grade, doesn't matter. The grade is not significant. That tells me very, very little about what effort I put into it and why it was an A grade. If my teacher, my friend, my mentor, my coach, my community advisor says to me, Bill, I really like the way you, and then gives me some explicit description about my behavior, and I noticed it turned up in, and gives me some specific information about how it's helped me improve what I was doing, oh, by the way, you got an A grade. Can you hear the difference? I am hearing that my efforts, when specifically targeted, are going to benefit me. And that's what we need all kids to learn. And we need it more, I think, at least as much as simply thinking about life stage and early years. Of course we need to invest in early years. You can fix this with teenagers. I've seen schools which have really transformed lives of kids who said, I'm crap at maths. Yeah? And maybe their dad said that to them too. Or mum. I'm not trying to make a gender point. Yeah? So there are some really breaking news, simple techniques that sports scientists, coaches, many informal educators, psychologists are using. Because we need to get clearer, I think, about this missing step. Yeah, of course, parental engagement is true, worthy, noble, wonderful, but exactly how does it work? And that will depend on context. And you're going to hear some fantastic examples throughout this conference where you get that context and you really understand how and why that has worked. Lauren Resnick, I think, suggests a really compelling theory of change about why we're trying to, how these actions can help develop, cultivate resilient, persevering growth mindset kids. Last few slides. So I started with Ruby and I end with Ruby. I would love to think that every school sees it as its mission in its formal interventions in classrooms. We were talking about split screen teaching that talks about the discipline and the capability at the same time, how assessment systems need to change, how reports to parents need to change. There's a lot that needs to change, how homework and home learning needs to change. It does. We were looking at a lovely film of a little boy up in a very impoverished estate in Aberdeen who was learning maths with his mum, single mum, had been lent a tablet so that he could make a film of 3 different angles by firing marshmallows over his hoosh, as he said. And some of you were in that, and I think you may have found it quite moving. Family learning, family and community learning, is the place where all this happens so well. And trying to understand how we can better do that and aggregate it up is really, really, really important. So that we can not think of confidence or like self-esteem. It's not an injection. It's the outcome of different parenting and different teaching and different learning. It's the outcome of having a growth mindset. You have a can-do mentality because you've had these life-enriching experiences. Or curiosity. Don't worry, I'm not going to walk around them all. Curiosity, I think, is probably the most important. It is the thing that drives learning. And the difference between men and women and cats and dogs and monkeys and flying foxes and every other mammal that you can think of, including kangaroos, is that curious animals are curious about survival and food. We are epistemically curious. We're just interested in a whole heap of stuff, and that's wonderful too. One specific example of a school that's taken this seriously and created, and there will be a number of, and I've seen already in the pack, a lovely Australian department app that better keeps parents informed. Here is the Marvellous Me app. You can get it from the App Store, which is trying to do one important thing. It's trying to avoid that moment of interaction between parent, carer, and a child on return from school. I don't know if it's like you in your house, but a conversation you can hardly stop yourself goes along the lines of, how was school today? When teenagers, especially older teenagers, were asked to rank the silliest, daftest questions that parents ask them, this is top of the heap. Most self-respecting teenagers go straight to the fridge and disappear out of your hair until you can think of some more intelligent questions. Do they not? Of course they do. So the Marvellous Me app has come up with a whole series of digital badges and really simple ways of making sure that the conversation you start with is, that was a great piece of artwork you did this morning. What? Goes the teenager for a moment, but then not for a moment, because we're talking about Facebook Instagrammers, so they're rapidly onto that, and there's a different kind of conversation. You've been a fantastic audience. If you want to continue the dialogue, there are a number of means for you doing it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks so much, Bill. That was fabulous. I'm really quite inspired to go home to my own little almost 6 and almost 8-year-olds and think about what I want for them in their learning, what counts, and what do I want them to be better at. Putting into practice those goals, feedback, practice ideas, and ensuring the vital role of empathy in how we relate to our children. I definitely want determined, optimistic, emotionally intelligent kids, and I'm pretty sure Australia wants those too. So our next speaker, I'm thrilled to introduce, is with us by a bit of serendipity. Earlier in the year, my beautiful, fantastic colleague, Barbara Barker, who many of you will meet while you're here, she's the manager of our parent engagement team at ARACY. Barbara came across an article in the Sydney Morning Herald about a high school in the Illawarra district on the south coast of New South Wales that had dramatically turned around its HSC results through an all-of-school strategy that included building communication with parents, as well as improving quality of teaching and learning. And we are so delighted to have the principal of that school with us here today to share from her experiences in effective, authentic parent engagement and the role it has to play in harnessing student potential. So please join me in welcoming the principal of Woonona High School, Ms. Belinda Wall.
Thank you, Charlene. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come along and share the journey that Woonona High School has been on for the last few years, but more importantly, to share the success of our students and to share the success of our teaching and learning staff at Woonona High School. Just to put it into context, our school is what I would describe as a garden variety comprehensive high school. It is located on the south coast of New South Wales. It's a 2-kilometre walk to the beach and a 2-kilometre walk to the escarpment. So is it a beautiful place to be? Absolutely. And that context certainly framed the context I walked into in 2011. We have 67% of our demographic is in the bottom 2 quartiles of socioeconomic disadvantage, and 11% in the top quartile. And that 11% in the top quartile generally are predominantly tradespeople who probably earn a lot more than you and I sitting in the audience today. That demographic is changing though, and it's changing predominantly due to the booming housing market in the Illawarra as it is in Sydney and Melbourne. We have a diverse curriculum, we are comprehensive, we have a huge sporting opportunities for our students, extracurricular activities, and they are all valued by our community. And the evaluations that we conduct each year continue to reinforce that information that our parents want our students to have that broad range of experiences at high school. We have had an unrelenting commitment to professional learning. It underpins all that we do at Woonona High School. Quality teaching and formative assessment. So much of what Bill was speaking about resonates so much with what we have, the journey that we have been on at Woonona High School. We have strong working relationships with our local primary schools through the establishment of our Woonona Learning Community. And 50% of our teachers are currently what we refer to as early career teachers. We have significant school-wide pedagogical change, and I will touch on that briefly. We have strong links with the University of Wollongong and Illawarra businesses, but it hasn't always been like that. I was appointed to the school in September of 2011, so we began the 2000 school year with declining student numbers. In 2009, the school had 830 students. When I arrived in 2011, that had dropped to 680 students and continued to decline right through until 2014. They are not students who were choosing not to come to Woonona High School. They were students who were choosing to leave Woonona High School, and they were leaving Woonona High School for a multiplicity of reasons. That resulted in loss of executive positions, loss of teaching positions in the school, very negative community perceptions, very weak links with our partner primary schools, staff complacency, low student aspirations and expectations, school-wide discipline problems, untapped staff potential, and a lack of direction in the school. So how did we go about changing that? In a nutshell, a lot of hard work. So what approach did we take? We got to know our community. That was paramount. We needed to know, what does this community value? What do they want for their students? What do we want as educators for our students? High expectations. High expectations underpin everything that we have been doing and everything that we will be doing into the future. High expectations in terms of behaviour and uniform. For many of our parents, this was very base. Why are you focusing on that initially? And that was an initial focus, and it took a very short period of time for that message to go through to the community. That's what the community valued. They wanted our students to look good, they wanted them to feel pride about their school, and they wanted consistency in terms of what were the expectations of students' behaviour at Woonona High School. We undertook a whole school evaluation, and we continue to do that every single year. We elicit feedback from our parents, we elicit feedback from our staff and our students. Not only do we elicit that feedback, but we actually act on it, and that's been critical, acting on that feedback that those parents and members of staff and students have been providing us with each year. Very strategically, using our personnel and financial resources judiciously and making sure that we were going to get the most bang for our buck where we were putting our money. The strategic use of Gonski funding, it has been a godsend for us. We're a small school, so our increase in funding due to Gonski reforms has not been substantial, but certainly substantial enough for us to be able to make significant changes in our school. We use research to underpin everything that we do at our high school. In fact, I think it was maybe 2014 or 15, we went to a presentation of Bill's when he was talking about his creativity wheel, and we now incorporate that into our assessment matrix. So that's become part